Hey, what's up? John Sonmez here from simpleprogrammer.com. So I have an interview today that I think a lot of you are going to be excited about, and some of you are going to unsubscribe from, but that's okay because, the truth sometimes hurts. But I have with me here James Damore, who, am I saying your name right? The last name?
Damore.
Damore, okay. James, if you don't know, wrote the infamous Google Manifesto, and Google in a show of tolerance, I would say, immediately fired him. Which is amazing. So anyway, I really, this was when I heard about this, I was actually traveling Europe, and a lot of you said, hey, you got to do a video on this, and I did do a video. And we'll link to that, but I really wanted to talk to James and discuss this, because I think that when I read that memo, I was like, wow, this is definitely resonates with what I've seen, and this message needs to get out and be supported. And I think a lot of other people who have similar opinions as myself. I think Stephen Molyneux, I can't say last names, and what's his name, the professor guy, I can't remember his name anyway, but. Yes. They also jumped on this and said this is a good chance to inform people, and I think this is good. So anyway, that's a very long intro, but welcome, James.
Yeah, thanks.
So for for those that don't know about you, or your background and everything, maybe you could give a short introduction of who you are. And obviously you're more than just the Google Manifesto. So
yeah, I'm a general nerd. I was super interested in chess and Magic the Gathering as a kid, and I never really knew what I wanted to do for a job. So at college I just majored in like all different sciences and psychology and economics. And then I ended up going to grad school in systems biology. And then I got into these coding competitions. And at some point I did well enough that Google just decided to contact me and say, hey, you've done well enough, let's get you at Google. And so I left the PhD program with just a master's, and then I joined Google after that. And I was there for 4 years.
Cool, awesome. So I have to say, I was a big Magic the Gathering player as well. In fact, one of my good friends, he owns one of the largest online stores for Magic the Gathering, and he's got he invites me over sometimes. He's out of Boise, Idaho, and he's got like this 40,000 square foot warehouse full of Magic the Gathering cards. It's insane. I used to collect them before I met him, and then I was like, if I ever need a deck, I just sold him all my cards. I was like, I just would get it from him. So yeah. So you're at Google for 4 years. Also interesting too. I was doing like Top Coder for a while. It was really fun. I don't know, was that the coding competitions you were doing, or were you doing something else? Or
I did a little bit of that, but the one that Google contacted me from was the Google Code Jam.
Oh yeah, okay, yep, cool. Yeah, those things are addictive.
Yeah.
So then just for the people that don't know the whole story, the timeline, and it's funny too. I think it's funny like that now you have to say, well, I went to I was in a PhD program, and then I had to and then I left it, and you have to make that explicit, because if you don't, you'll be attacked by people that will try and discredit you, right? I know. I was like, right. I was doing some research, and I was like, wow, hey, let's write a whole article about you changing your LinkedIn profile. That's great. I mean, like,
yeah, the story behind that was just that, I made my LinkedIn profile, and it says, put your academic history. And so I put, 2011 to 2016, which was my expected graduation date. I was in the PhD program.
Right, yeah.
And then I just never touched the LinkedIn profile for like 5 years after that.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Then people, after people started messaging me actually through my LinkedIn about all this, I realized, hey, it still has this outdated information. And people should be able to see that, 2016 is after I joined Google. So, I clearly just wasn't managing my account. But
Yeah, I mean, when people when people don't like what you're saying, they'll find whatever they can to discredit you. I mean,
Right.
that's one
Yeah.
of the classic things. I was just listening to a thing. Someone had recorded a video from Ben Shapiro, and he was talking about, and someone had just tried to like say, to him, "Do you have a degree in sociology, or do you?" And he was basically like, you're basically trying to attack my credentials because you can't counter my argument. You don't have any, and
Yeah.
that seems to be the general response to anything that that doesn't go down well with people nowadays, unfortunately, is to attack the person or their as if credentials somehow give us some magic
Yeah.
ability to speak on a subject, as if our logic and our arguments alone aren't good enough, right? I hate that, but
Yeah, and like part of the reason I left the PhD program was that I realized that nothing magical happens once you get the PhD.
right.
Yeah.
So just for those that aren't, because I tell people don't read the news. So for those people that listen to my advice, maybe you can give kind of a recount of what happened, of the story of the Google Manifesto.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So I went to multiple diversity programs at Google because I was actually very interested in making my team more inclusive. I saw some people not speaking up in meetings and some people just not being generally included in the in crowd of the team. And I wanted to know how we could improve that. So I went to these diversity and inclusion programs, but I found out that it was really just about diversity of demographics. So getting as many underrepresented minorities and women at Google as we possibly can. And they admitted to doing potentially illegal things during it. And I thought that just a lot of it was misguided, that because it can actually increase a lot of tensions between groups. And it wasn't really even looking at the core reasons why we're seeing fewer women interested in tech. They only would admit that sexism was the only cause. And so we have to because we don't see any overt sexism like, oh, you're a woman, therefore you can't code. They say that, oh, it all must be these unconscious biases that we have. And so they have a lot of unconscious bias or implicit bias training to try to root out any potential biases you have. And I even went to one program that was basically trying to retrain your brain on how it thinks about race.
That's called brainwashing.
Yeah, a lot of this is just pretty much brainwashing you into
Yeah.
a certain ideology. And I was trying to point out some of those problems in the document. And so I guess to continue with the timeline, I went to these programs about a month before this ever went public. And I wrote this document to clarify my thoughts. And I submitted it as feedback to the programs, but they looked at it. It's just a Google Doc, so I could see who was looking at it and reading it, but no one ever made any comments to it. And then I had some personal discussions with people, and I shared it with them. And half of them would be just like, okay, yes, I agree. And the other half would be, we would have actual constructive criticism about the document, and I actually revised it quite a bit after that. And so after all of that feedback was in, I decided, I really just wanted to know what was wrong about the document, because if it's perfectly accurate, then our culture has a big problem.
Right.
And there's potentially illegal things happening at Google. Like, I kept trying to meet with HR and ask them, are these things illegal? And they kept avoiding the issue, really.
Yeah.
And so I sent it to a group called Skeptics. So I thought that they would be, skeptical and be able to point out holes in it. But they didn't seem to be that interested in actual scientific rigor or anything. They just immediately like, oh, this is horrible. You're a racist. You're a sexist. And it exploded from there within the company.
Yeah. Wow. And then, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, within a few days after that, someone leaked it to the media. And there was a ton of bad PR for Google because a lot of the media was just portraying this as some sexist, anti-diversity screed or whatever. And they were really misrepresenting what I was saying, and even saying that it was totally unscientific, when later articles would point out that no, there are actual scientists that think that this is pretty much valid. Maybe some of the ways that I extrapolate the data of saying, cooperation and its effect in the workplace, that hasn't been studied as much, but these base psychological factors, that those have been studied quite a bit. There's surveys with about 1 million people in them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's interesting when you bring up one of these topics. That was the thing that really alarms me in society today, is that because, just to like make a statement that it goes against what seems to be like in the minds of what is absolutely morally correct of the majority of society today, it makes you a heretic, and like we can't even talk about these things. And it's really disturbing. I don't know if you've read a book, a really good book by John Stuart Mills called On Liberty. If not, that might be a book that you're very interested in. But in the book, he talks about, he's an English philosopher, and he talks about this idea that even the most reprehensible viewpoints in culture, that we need to be able to have people express them and not squelch them, because we don't know if our own ideology that we have now may change and may be wrong, and also that we need to reinforce it if it is right by constantly having the counter arguments presented, so that we can say, right, no, this is, we don't just say, okay, no, we've settled this. This is the moral stance now, and if anyone brings up anything against this, we don't even have to discuss it or talk about it, because we've already made the decision. Because he points historically to times when that was the case. For example, the Catholic Church has responsible for the Dark Ages, and they basically at one point said, and before the Catholic Church, right, Christianity, Catholicism was completely wrong. But then after Emperor Constantine, and then it became a political movement, then the Catholic Church became the absolute law and the absolute right, and anyone who was wrong, we burned them at the stake, and we ended at a period of dark ages for several hundred years because of that, and similar things have happened in China. And so even though at that particular time in history everyone thought that this particular viewpoint was right and everything else was heretical, I mean, if you think about it now, we flipped again, right? I mean, we don't think that the Christian Catholic Church is the absolute right, and everything that's against that is wrong and shouldn't be questioned. So it's amazing, like, I think that today we're getting to this point where people just want to shut out anything that they don't like. So go ahead. Yeah.
There's just so much that people try to justify, words are violence, or this offends me, therefore you can't speak it. But if we put the line at what offends people is what you can't say, then you can never dissent against popular opinion, because that's necessarily will offend people. And especially with a lot of these political issues where it's based on deep moral values, and countering them can often trigger people's emotional reaction.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, just thinking about, like, I was just thinking about this the other day. It's sort of like sometimes you have this contradiction, and it's like, do you believe in evolution or in natural selection? And I mean, do you believe in evolution or that everyone is absolutely equal? Like, you can't kind of hold both of these views, right? Because if you look at evolution, and I mean, either God created like human beings just as they are intentionally, and they're all equal, it doesn't matter race or ethnicity or anything like that, or the evolutionary process created man. I mean, you can choose one. I don't care which one a person chooses, but I don't think you can choose evolution and then say that there's not differences in people. I mean, and this is not to be like a racist or a sexist thing. It's just that if you look at different species across the planet, I mean, heck, we breed dogs, right? And there are different breeds of dogs that are more intelligent and less intelligent, and that are better companions, that have different attributes and traits, and that's just within species that we've bred. And then if you look at the sexes in nature as well, between male and female, there's a lot of differences. I mean, the black widow spider female eats the eats the smaller male black widow spider after copulation, right? So I mean, these are definitely different things. And so for us to say, okay, well, it applies to all of biology except for humans.
Right.
It just like, it blows my mind. It just, again, I'm the first person to like welcome anyone into the tech field. I mean, I totally help women, minority. It doesn't matter, because I don't even, I try not to even care about, that I wouldn't give special help or privilege to a particular class, but just, all welcome it. But I feel like a lot of, and I think you hit so well on that in the Google Manifesto, is like that data is completely ignored. And the idea that the only possible thing that could possibly explain a lack of diversity would be prejudice. And then I still have to go to the fact that, like, is society's constructs, is that not part of evolution as well? I mean, if that is the case, even if it were, it would still be a natural byproduct of society. I mean, the evolution, you could, ants and bees have evolved, but they can't function as individuals. They function within society, at least in hives and nests, and there's a hive mind. So society is just is a product of evolution as well. So I don't know. I just feel like I'm spouting a lot of things, but a lot of those things are ignored. And so I was really excited when I read your memo, because I'm like, yeah, this needs to be called to the forefront.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of people that believe in this blank slate sort of theory, where people are born and as blank slates, and it's only society that causes the differences that we see in populations. But it's time and again we see that this blank slate hypothesis just isn't totally true. And it is true that society shapes us in many ways, but it's also true that hormones have an effect, right? And it's not saying that one is better than the other in any way, or that it in any way justifies discrimination, but it's something that we should be aware of if we want to actually, improve the human condition and improve tech in general, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, I don't know how we can just ignore knowledge and expect that to be a net positive to the world, right?
Right, exactly, because it doesn't fit with the pleasant construction of how things should work, and that's it's unfortunate. I mean, and it's interesting too, because like I don't know. I mean, in some way, would the world be a better place if there was no differences between men and women? I can't imagine. I mean, without a north and a south pole, I mean, without electromagnetic poles and in opposite charges, things sort of would be dull, I think. It seems kind of weird that people don't acknowledge this, or that they want to wipe this thing out as if it's bad. I mean, maybe some people would say it's bad, but I think one of the things, like, do we not have the right to say maybe it is good? Right. I mean, I think that's but that seems to be no. I think it's dismissed. It says, oh no, you're promoting gender stereotypes, invalid gender stereotypes. So we're not even going to hear what you have to say. Not even entertain.
Yeah. I think it's. I mean, our evolved traits likely were a positive for us. So our gender dimorphism, where there's differences between men and women. Men are generally taller and have higher muscle mass. That was likely selected for. So these psychological traits were also likely selected for, although, you know, they're not, it's not as if they're immutable and that culture has no effect.
Right. I mean, Spud Webb was a short guy who played professional basketball. He was genetically predispositioned to not be a good basketball player by virtue of what we've called, you know, defined as the average height of a good, but he overcame that. I mean, so I think there's, you know, what you're saying is absolutely correct. Is it's like we can't just, you know, it's not like I don't think anyone, you know, is putting forward, and I certainly didn't think that you're putting forward the notion that because there's differences that we should pick one group over the other.
Right.
It's just more of an explanation, right?
Yeah, it's just an explanation for why we may see fewer women interested in tech. And I try to repeat over and over that we should just treat people as individuals and not just as a member of their group. But they seem to be very tied to this like group-based thinking. And I mean, I think that this is generally part of the ideology of the left, where you try to identify victim groups and then help those victim groups. And it's heresy to ever blame or say that, you know, their victimhood status is because of any external factors, or is not because of external factors, is because of, you know, factors within the group. And I think generally also this whole idea that women are always victims and, you know, they need our help is removing a lot of agency from women in general. And it's generally not a healthy thing, I think.
Oh yeah, I'm in total agreement with you. I've often talked to women in tech that have spoke at conferences and whatnot, and I've always asked them. I've always been curious because I ask the question a lot of times of how do you feel like. How do you feel? Do you feel like you were picked to give this talk or for this this particular thing because you're a woman or because of your qualifications? And how do you know? Like, how does that make you feel? Like, I may know that this person is qualified, and you know, it doesn't even matter to me so much. But as a person, like, I don't know. I'll give you an example. One time I was working at HP, and one of the guys there, I was trying to become an employee from a contractor. He said, "Hey, you're Hispanic, so you can get in." And I was like, he's like, yeah, it'll be much easier for you. And you know, because we have equal employment, you know, and I did this, and this is, and you can even get a pay bump. And when he said that, I'm not Hispanic. I mean, you know, most people can't even figure out what I am. I'm like Turkish and Italian. I mean, and we have access to like 23andMe now, and so I can't even. It's so hard to even just say what anyone is. I mean, how do you even identify? But that's a different. But when he said that to me, I felt horrible. I was like, man, if I get this job and it's because people think that I'm Hispanic, that sucks. Like I would rather not. I'd rather wear a wig and like, you know, like I would never ever want to. I would never want to be in a position where I had to question whether I got something because I was of a minority group or because it was my merits, right? And so I feel like you just said, like you said, when we do this, we kind of take away something from women that gives them the feeling that they've earned it. Like they always have to question. I guess that's what I'm saying. It's like, because I felt that, and I think that as a woman, I would probably always feel like I have to question whether or not my merits got me there, or if some stupid diversity program plugged me in because I was the perfect match, being a black woman who's transgender or gay or something. You know what I mean? Like I never would want to qualify on those. But I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I've heard the sentiment many times from women and other underrepresented minorities that felt like, you know, they may have only been there, or they don't feel, or they just don't like having to justify themselves so often because of that.
Right.
And, you know, I think that this doesn't change the fact that we can try to make the workplace more inclusive, though, of different working styles and different people. And that itself may help diversity, because diversity doesn't matter unless you're actually inclusive of those different people. And so we could change the workplace to maybe help more feminine styles of working. Often it's actually that there's a masculine culture maybe that that favors people that are aggressive and assertive, and doesn't necessarily really help people that are cooperative and help multiple different teams. That's something that we could change about the culture that would help women without actually directly lowering the bar or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I mean, I think we need more soft skills. I mean, that's definitely something that that I preach here on this channel, and I think that would definitely help the tech field just in general, right? For everyone. I think that's a good change. And it's kind of interesting just to hear you say that, because I mean, so much of the media would paint what you, I mean, well, that's the other question I really am interested in, is what happened? Like, what was the backlash? Because how did you feel? Like, I mean, this must have been a shocker for you to suddenly be exposed to this world of media and all these people hating you, and they don't even know you, right? Which is so ironic, because they're tolerant. Let's be tolerant of everyone except for people who are intolerant, and those people we can just burn at the stake. And you kind of got a little bit of that. You're probably still getting a lot of that. So how did that feel? What was that like?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't nice. At some point I would just stop reading the comments and the articles, because there were so many that just misrepresented what I said, and it was clear that they didn't even read it sometimes, and they just were repeating other headlines. And it was clear that they weren't interested in actual discussion, because so few people that took a negative stance to what I was saying would actually engage me and offer a long form interview like this. They don't want to actually discuss the issues. They just want to virtue signal and show that, oh, I'm so morally virtuous that this is below me,
right?
And see how good I am. But they just don't really address any of the concerns that I have, and it's really a shame, because I made several suggestions on how we could actually address the gender gap and remove some of our illegal practices, but it's not clear that they're ever really going to do that. And also, there's nothing that they've done, at least so far, to really address the political climate at Google, which was part of the biggest reasons. The title was Google's Ideological Echo Chamber, right?
Right, exactly.
And, there's still many people that feel completely alienated at Google, and likely other Silicon Valley and jobs.
And it's interesting. I mean, that it's based on, like, the reason why your opinion doesn't count is in some part because you're a white male, and in some part because you have a different ideological opinion than they do. So to promote tolerance and diversity, is it only diversity at the skin deep level? Which I'm just like appalled that diversity at the skin deep level is what we're after as a society, especially considering that how much intermixing and that we have now. I mean, like I said, everyone has access to DNA testing and 23andMe, and I did my own, and I'm like, oh, okay, you figure out all these things about yourself, and you can't really identify with the exact minority anymore. At least a lot of people can't. And so where do those people fit in? So if it's just that we care about having, it's almost just for image, right? I mean, that's what it
right.
feels like. Is it's like we just feel like we're doing the good thing and we look good, and we don't have to tackle any of the difficult issues of diversity and diversity of opinion. And that to me, that's way more scary than if we had a tech field that was 90% men. I think it probably is, but to me, that's as long as we have diversity of opinion and ideas, to me that's what's important.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently that's not correct.
Yeah, and when they actually look at studies of what type of diversity is good for business. The diversity of demographics actually hasn't been shown to be positive when you look at meta-analyses. But diversity of opinion and feeling like you can voice a differing opinion, those are actually positives. So, I'm all for making sure that everyone feels included, and not making underrepresented minorities, for example, feel like they're not welcome here, or women. But we still need to also welcome differing opinions.
Right. And I think a lot of it too is just, I was thinking about, like, a lot of people bug me. They're like, because I have a 6-year-old daughter, and they're like, well, have you started teaching her to code yet? And I'm like, and sometimes when I say no, they're offended, like I'm doing an injustice to the world. And and my thought is, like, she's going to kind of, I'm not going to force her down the path that, and I almost feel like it's like, okay, there's a disproportionate number of female hairdressers to male hairdressers, and most of the male hairdressers are gay, right? So, like, this is just, I didn't invent this. Like, this is just how things happen. And I don't think there's any, like, I don't think Paul Mitchell is, like, purposely doing this, right? I mean, this is just how things, the inclinations of people, they chose these professions, or you could say the same thing in nursing, right? There's more women in nursing or teaching. Right. And so if there's more men in technology, is that even a problem? Like, is there a reason? Is this a problem that we actually need to solve? Right? I mean, there's a problem. I think if the women if women can't get into technology and they want to, because people are discriminating, or when they are here, and there is some of this problem. That there's abuse, and there's I've seen it firsthand. There is some of that. So those are actual real problems. But I think, like, having a 50-50 ratio of male and female, if you have a bunch of people that don't really want to be there, but they've been told by society that, hey, they need to, and they need to become engineers, I don't know if that's going to improve things.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of guilting people into feeling like they need to go into tech. And, oh yes, because women can do this, you need to do it, to provide a positive example. When that just takes agency, again, away from people. When you say that you need to do this, it doesn't matter what you personally want to do, but this is what's will provide the best example to other people.
Right. It's almost like you have a debt to society, as opposed to your own agency.
Yeah. And there may be something to be said about, there not being enough female role models in computer science. That's something that, I personally don't have much experience with. Although, when you look at the actual stereotypes that people have in their head of, are women just as good at computers as men? The stereotypes are, equal in kids. So it's not as if little girls think that girls can't become coders,
Right. I think it's also interesting. One of the things is that I read this. There's a really good book called Peak. There's actually 2 books called Peak, but the older Peak, I can't remember the author of it. And in it, he basically talks about, I know you've got a background in chess, and he talks about chess masters and like chess, and he basically he has a study with IQs, and he's saying that, like, IQs initially, they determine who's going to initially be good at chess, but then in the master level, when people are very good at the highest levels of chess, that having a high IQ actually might make you slightly disadvantaged, and the speculation is because you didn't try as hard early on, and essentially the whole book is about the concept of, what I would say, my summary of it would be that whatever stats you roll up in D&D, it doesn't matter what they were. It matters what level you are. And anyone who's played an RPG knows that it doesn't matter what you're, like, you re-roll the stats over and over again. And it doesn't matter what you're initially, it's a higher level is going to be the most important thing. And so essentially the whole book says that what matters is practice, is how much hours that people put into it. And so, I mean, the reason why I'm saying that is because even if, and I'm saying if, right? I mean, we should be open to discuss this. It may not be true, but even if there was a disadvantage biologically for a female in coding, in technology, or for some minority group or whatever it is, or a majority group, who knows? Even if there is some kind of disadvantage initially, those are like stats in a D&D game. Like if you've leveled up, if you've practiced, like everyone can be at the, the playing field levels as you move into the expert level. It doesn't matter what stats what you were born with, except for perhaps, basketball.
Yeah, and one other possible explanation for the reason why high IQ doesn't necessarily correlate with chess skill once you get to a certain level is that those people with very high IQ may have just other options in their life. And this is another reason that we see potentially fewer women in tech, because they seem to have more options. So if you just look at quantitative and verbal ability of high achieving individuals, women are much more likely to be well balanced, so both good at quantitative and verbal, while men are much more likely to be only good at quantitative and not good at verbal. And so those men don't really have other options outside of STEM, while the women do.
Right.
And that's good for them. I'm personally part of the group that's good at quantitative and not necessarily that good at verbal. And I don't necessarily have the abilities to go into journalism or talk radio or anything like that, but I could code really well. And so I really practiced that skill, and I became an expert in that.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's I think that's just like we're looking at it's a difference between looking at the data and arriving the cause versus looking at the cause and trying to like orchestrate the data around it. And so it makes sense that there would be differences, right? So one thing I want to ask you about too that really stuck with me that you said, I think a lot of people didn't like what you said about this, but I did, because I 100% agree, and I preach it on this channel. Is you mentioned in the manifesto that status, that men in general are more evaluated. I might not be quoting you exactly, but more evaluated by status, and that strive for status more. And that may explain, and you said may, which like, it's like, can we not discuss, maybe you're wrong, I don't know, but may, is there any, at what point can we not even speculate on these things? But you said that, and I agreed with that. I thought that was, so I thought maybe you could kind of expound upon that a little bit.
Yeah, so I guess even throughout human history, if you look at which men reproduced, for example, only 40% of all men reproduce. So it was only the top 40%. And even when you look into that, it wasn't an even distribution. The very top reproduced much more often than the 40th percentile. But 80% of women reproduced.
Right.
And so, men are often pushed to be into these high risk, high reward situations. This may in part explain why there are more founders of companies that are men, because I personally wouldn't want to create my own company. There's a huge risk in that, and most companies fail, right? But if you do succeed, then you end up making a ton of money.
Exactly.
And it's similar to Genghis Khan, who had thousands of children. That's just not possible for a female to do. And so at least the incentives are much different between men and women, where it's much more acceptable or to be sort of not screwed up as a female, but just fine. This is partly why we also see more men on the bottom end of the distribution of a lot of traits, like more men that are homeless, and more in the prison, and more on the bottom of the IQ curve too.
Yep.
So this higher variance among men, we see it in many places, and it's really unfortunate that we keep getting pushed this fallacy that, oh, because a lot of the top men, or a lot of the top positions are filled by men, then men obviously have it easier. When really, it's not even worth it necessarily to be in that top position,
Right.
because you have to work 80 hours, and it's not necessarily the best for a fulfilling life. And also, you're ignoring that men also are 80% or 70% of homeless and 90% of the prisons. So if we're only interested in one side of the gender gap, it's really biased, and it's a fallacy that we often see in society.
That's a really good point. In fact, I mean, it just made me think maybe we should be putting some diversity requirements within prisons and try to get more women locked up.
Yeah, I mean, if you really use these same arguments,
right,
that they seem so obviously wrong. Of okay, either there's some biological difference between men and women that are causing more men to go into prison, or there's huge sexism.
right.
And I would argue that there is sexism in the justice system.
Of course, yeah.
If you're tried for the same trial with the same evidence, men are much more likely to be committed and serve longer sentences. But that's not the sole reason why we see such a huge disparity in violent crimes, for example.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, testosterone it plays a huge part in that. I mean, hormones and just like you said, the drive for status. I mean, one of the things, and I might be wrong on this, but I believe I read that the highest suicide rate, the group that has the highest suicide rate in the world is teenage men. And I could be wrong on it, but I believe it's at least very high. And and it just goes to show. I mean, it's not to say that women don't have it hard or whatever, but we have different difficulties, different struggles, and for a man, and I know especially on this YouTube channel, because I get a lot of it. I get a lot of sappy emails and guys that are very upset and sad because they see the Pareto's law distribution and reproduction. And it hurts them because they're like, man, I'm never going to have a girlfriend. I'm never going to, experience these things in life because I'm not in the top 10% alpha male, right? And so, I think that it's kind of so while you might knock down the peg of the guys that are in the top by saying that their life was easier or whatever, it really puts a huge burden on the 80% of guys that are on the lower tier, because now not only were they subservient to the alpha men that were accomplishing things, had the higher drive, achieved the status, but now they are having to bear the guilt and the weight for something they didn't even do. They didn't even get to have the parties. They weren't even the frat boys. They didn't have all the advantages, but they have the whole burden put onto them. And honestly, my heart goes out to those people. A lot of them are in my audience, and I try to help them to become stronger and to learn how to gain status and to fight their way up. Because that's a really sad fallout. And I, like I said, I've heard enough of the sad stories that those are the people that I feel like are being damaged the most, and they have no voice because a lot of them are afraid to speak up, like you mentioned. I'm glad that you did, but so many people I think you'd said that had read your manifesto and agreed with you in private, but in public they disowned you, which is unfortunate. So they're afraid to speak up, and when they do, they're told, "Oh, sorry, you're a white male, so you need to shut up. You don't have a say." And that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. And I guess going back to the suicide thing, I think, yes, so men actually commit suicide much more often or die from suicide much more often than females. And I think, maybe teenage is really high. I think also when they're much older, that's much higher. It's often when their spouse dies, then they'll commit suicide soon after, because the male gender role and the sense of worth is often how much you can provide and protect your family.
exactly.
And if your spouse is now dead, your life is in some ways meaningless at that point. And that causes a lot of men to commit suicide, and that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's very true. It's interesting too, just the whole status. I mean, again, a lot of people dislike what I say about this, but I mean, I always tell people just observe reality, and then you can see. But men primary select women based on physical attractiveness. That's the main factor. But women, and a lot of guys get confused about this. They think that women must select men based on the same thing, which is not true. Instead, they select them based on status. This is just the hard facts of life, and there's reasons why that happens biologically. But for us to completely deny this doesn't make much sense. I always throw back and talk about what was the best-selling book for like 3 years or 4 years. It's still on the top list. Is that ridiculous book? What is it called? I just forgot the name of it now. That whole BDSM book.
50 Shades of Grey?
Yeah, 50 Shades of Grey, right? And I'm like, who's buying this book? Is it, I mean, because honestly, like if it's a best-selling book, who's buying this book? Are guys buying this book? Some, but it's mostly women. And so like if society is telling us one thing, right? Society is telling us that women do not like a dominant male, that status doesn't matter for men, that they want a passive submissive guy that's equal with them in everything. But the actual sales of the book and what women actually want are telling us something different. And I'm not saying that to say that good or bad or to judge people. It's just to say that to deny biological differences is so ridiculous that, I mean, the very people that in one corner of their mouth are saying, we're all the same and gender roles are put on us by society. At the other corner of their mouth, or well, at the click of their mouse button, they're buying a book that completely is as sex, if by the liberal definition of sexism, is as sexist as it could possibly be.
Yeah. So, I think maybe it's not the same people buying these two things, simply because there are fewer and fewer people that are identifying with this mantra that all people are exactly the same and there are no differences at all. And we see this even when we look at who identifies as a feminist. I identify as yes, we should treat men and women the same, and everyone is equal in that way.
Right.
But the things that feminism are now fighting for are not really what people identify as actual issues in society. And so very few people actually identify as feminists anymore, even though everyone believes in the base tenet that men and women should be treated the same and are equal. Right.
And that's the other thing is too, like, I don't understand where it's coming from, because I mean, I've definitely met people that I would call sexist or racist, but very few. Like, right. I don't know where the big, like, most people even would hold the view that you just expressed, that I hold, that you hold, which is that men and women are basically equal. Like, there's no, like, they're different, but they're equal. Like, they have the same value. I would give a man or a woman the same opportunity. I would give a black man or a black woman the same opportunity, or Hispanic. Like, it doesn't, I mean, most people have that I know that's not universal, but it seems like, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? Because it seems like the only way, like you said, I think at the very beginning, is the only way to make it actually a problem is to say, well, there's secretly, it's a bias that's in your subconscious that you're not aware of, and that's. These are problems that I don't know if they need to be solved. It doesn't make any sense to me, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's much easier to just say, oh yes, it's some sort of bias that we can't necessarily identify, but it's there and we need to solve it, rather than actually looking at your ideology and saying, maybe this ideology isn't totally correct and we really should rethink things. I think a lot of this is they're just going on the slippery slope of, easy to say, politically correct things to say, but at some point they'll be so far from reality that it'll really bite them in the back.
And I, for the record, I think that the pendulum will swing the other way. It always seems to, and I think we're seeing some of it now as people are becoming braver and speaking up. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this, because you're going to get more hate for it, of course, but hopefully you'll get some love from my audience for having the courage to speak the truth, because it's difficult. And the other thing, along with that I just like to point out, I doubt anyone who disagrees with with the viewpoint is listening at this point. But if they are, what's I think is interesting to ask is, if I mean, because essentially what I gathered from you and from the manifesto was that this is how you think things are, that and what possible problems are, and this is how you're seeing things. But I'm open to discussion. Let's talk about this. And so I'd ask you the question: if someone in Google HR or diversity program was open to discussion, and they pointed you out things that showed why, not from a moralistic high ground, but from a logical standpoint or scientific standpoint, why what you're saying is not quite accurate or not quite true, how would you respond?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wanted those conversations. I had some with individual instructors and individual people in the programs, but they never really amounted to anything. I tried to escalate it, but they really just wouldn't confront any of the issues that I was trying to say. And I'm never saying that this document is the 100% truth and that there are no other perspectives. Right. I was simply saying this is one of the perspectives that's being silenced. And there's many aspects to the diversity program, and there's likely bias that is happening, but there's also this other thing that we should be cognizant of.
Right, exactly. And I think that's the perfectly reasonable and logical stance to have. That doesn't, I mean, you didn't assume the moral high ground. You didn't say this is how it is, and if you disagree, then you are a pig. Right. So, but apparently you're not shown the same courtesy, which is just is disturbing, and that's I think that's that is something that seems to be wrong with society. But so I have to ask you, where do you go from here? What is your, like, I kind of on a personal level, like, where are you going career-wise? What do you plan on doing from this point? I mean, you're in the media now. Like, you're, who knows if it'll be 15 minutes of fame or several years. But what's do you want to go the media route, or are you going to go still the coding route? What's your kind of thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I've been invited to speak at multiple events, and give my perspective on certain issues, even at diversity and inclusion conferences. And at least currently, I intend to do that. Yeah. And I think there's many people that want to hear my perspective, because my reputation can't really get any worse at this point with some of the social justice warriors. So I'm sort of allowed to say some things that some people are maybe thinking but don't have the courage to say.
Yep.
But yeah, I really don't know what exactly I want to do long term, simply because I don't know if that would be what I find fulfilling. I do really like just analyzing a system and finding out how it works and building different systems, which is basically what coding is. But maybe I can do that with other aspects of life, because there's systems everywhere. And I really do like trying to understand, the moral systems that are dictating how we live our lives, for example. Right.
Yeah, maybe you should study some philosophy. It'd be good. There is a very interesting, like, parallel between the two. I found between programming and philosophy. I think the same minds it approach things the same way. So. But yeah. So, well, I really appreciate you taking the time, and like I said, I appreciate the courage of you coming on, and like you said, you said it perfectly, that you you can't get any worse in social justice warriors' eyes. Well, I can't either. So, hey, we're in the same boat. So, but by virtue of that, we do have a platform that we can speak and say things that other people are afraid to say, or they have repercussions of saying. Fortunately, I don't have to worry about someone firing me, so I can just say whatever I want to say. And and I don't care if people unsubscribe either. So, and that's cool. I mean, it's sort of you know, I think that everything works in the universe for a reason and a purpose. And I really appreciate just your attitude of, you know, a lot of people would be very despondent and very. I'm sure you probably went through you know, some periods of being upset and crawling under your desk. You know, anytime I have an article that goes on Hacker News, I crawl under my desk and cry a little bit, but but no, I really appreciate just the way that you've handled it, and that you are willing to go and you know, and keep speaking, because I think the worst thing that we can do is let bullies silence us, and
Right.
and that's the only strategy I feel like the social justice warriors have, is to bully and silence. And is the more that we prevent that from happening, I think the more that we can inspire other people to become brave and to speak out as well. And that's the only way that things are going to change. And you know, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think both me and you and everyone kind of who agrees with our ideology, we just want people we just want a logical, reasonable, sensible, you know, scientifically based, where we can debate honestly, where we can find the truth by exploring all of the options and nooks and crannies, right? I mean, even people that I would say reprehensible as KKK, they have a voice, and they should have a voice, because all of even the things that are, quote, wrong, you know, if you don't express them, if you don't have an argument against them, if you don't have that representation, you forget why they're wrong. And that's I think that's a critical part of society functioning. Otherwise, we're destined for tyranny and mob rule.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate that Google has shut down the discussion, because, you know, it would be really great if they said, you know, yes, what you said was accurate, but, you know, this is why we still care about these certain things, and this is why we still have these programs. But you know, they've just totally shut it down and said that, no, this is wrong think, which will, I think, only backfire.
Yeah, I thought it was really, yeah, I mean, they basically martyred you instead, which, I mean, I guess in the interest of free thought, that was actually a good move for all of us who are interested in free thought, because it gave a huge platform to you. I was thinking, like, just from my you know, I turned on my evil brain, and I said, if I am the diversity person in charge of Google, here's what I do. What I do is I create a new position for you, and on a special interest group, you know, whatever, and I make you, you know, give you an honorary position of I give you a pay bump, right, which is a bribe essentially, and I say that you know, I welcome this discussion. We don't agree, but I welcome you to, you know, chair this particular group on alt-right sensitivity or whatever, you know what I mean, or something like that. And then I pay bump you in order to pay you off and make the problem go away, and everyone forgets about it, you know, the next day. So I thought it was interesting that instead it seems like an emotional response, like that's the logical, like, evil calculating mind response that's going to work 90% of the time, right? I mean, you got, if someone does that, you have to make a real, like, you know, they put you in an ethical dilemma, because then you have to decide, well, is my value worth taking this bribe or not, right? You know, and but instead they did the emotional response of, you know, fuck this guy. We're so I don't know. I mean, I honestly, I think that in the end it'll work out better for you because they did that. So I hope that it does. And if you ever need if I can ever do anything to help you or support you, just let me know. And you know, I've got an army. So.
All right. Yeah. Thanks.
All right, man. Well, thanks again, and I hope you have a good one, and hopefully they don't beat up on you too much. If you're ever speaking somewhere or something, let me know. I would definitely like to attend. And if you ever want to write an article or do a video for the channel, you want to use my platform, you're more than welcome to do it.
All right, yeah, thanks.
All right, take care, man.
See ya.